Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Student Experience Podcast. Joining us today as our guest is Alaia Peres. Alaia is the co-founder and the CEO of the community platform for education, Jumbia. Alaia is passionate about providing the opportunity for students to gain a sense of community, belonging, and to build genuine relationships during their higher education experience. As a student, Alaia was always passionate about entrepreneurship and had her first experience launching a startup when she was 20 and joined an edtech startup in Australia in 2019. When we talk about experience and student retention, one key element that is often raised is that need for a sense of community, belonging, and genuine relationships. Through these relationships, students gain the insight and the connections to grow via their social interactions, and it enables them to share their knowledge, their stories, and their experience. It also strengthens their likelihood to continue studying and feeling supported while they're at university or at another higher education provider. When Alaia reflected back to when she was a student and what she needed to enrich her learning experience, it was really that sense of community that resonated for her. As a result, Alaia made it her goal to make a meaningful impact in the education sector through her education technology company, Jumbia. And because of Jumbia, Alaia has now, last week, just relocated back to Paris, which is very exciting that she's joining us from there today. Welcome, Alaia.
Hi, Tanya, and thank you very much for hosting me through this podcast. I'm really happy to talk about my experience and to talk about what I believe is necessary for the student experience and above all what we're trying to achieve.
That sounds great. So deciding to start an enterprise to create an online community is pretty big when you think about the kind of competition that you might have out there like Facebook. Can you share with us why community? How is that currently missing, and what is the impact that an online community in particular can have for the student experience? Particularly if it's in-house, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it all started when I was working in a edtech company in Australia, and I got to talk with a lot of students, lecturers, and admins, and I realized that one thing that came back again and again was loneliness. Many students talked about having only 4 or 5 friends at uni, that they lacked, there was a big lack of a network, that they would end up university without having much friends to talk to or without having much people to connect with. And I believe this also came from the fact that universities in Australia are so big that actually students get lost. We often think that when there is a lot of people, it's actually easier to meet a lot of people that are like yourself. But actually when they are too big as they are, I think it's actually, you really get lost in the middle, and it's a nightmare to get people to talk to. And from this, so I realized this, and at the same time I was reflected back on my journey, and back on my own studies, which were in France. And I realized that the value I got from my degree was really through the connection I made there. I made friendship that will last a lifetime, I believe. And this was really the support I needed to go through my studies, and to be able to actually say that those years were the best of my life. And that it really allowed me to be prepared for the future through those friendships, but also through the network I built, and from that sense of belonging. I studied at HEC, and today I really have that feeling of being part of a community, being part of the HEC community. And if I want to reach out to someone in that network, people are really there for me. And that is an amazing asset, I believe, today. So from this, when realizing that this was really lacking in Australia, and this is actually the value I had from my degree, I thought that there was something to do. And even in France, it's not perfect, and there is something to do as well, which is why I'm there now. So I believe that I believe that there was something to do in terms of online communities and connecting students together. And I think that need is even growing bigger and bigger with the shift to online learning today. The academic parts of education have been moved online. We can, like LMS are doing a great job, etc. But the student experience part of learning has I feel, has kind of been forgotten and kind of left behind as universities are really focusing on the academic content, but don't necessarily realise that the academic content is nearly nothing without the student experience part, especially when you're competing with like online learning platforms. So this was kind of why I came to the fact that I needed to launch this company, that I wanted to launch this company. And yeah, so it wasn't really deciding that I wanted to launch a company there. It was more deciding that there was a need, and then having the need to have an impact, and so more of a passion than really a business goal. And now the few questions we've been trying to sort of answer, and the thing that we've been working on was really how to get students to know who's around, how do we facilitate interaction, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to connect with others, with respecting online security and online privacy though.
And like, I totally agree with what you're saying. I know when I think back on my own time at university, even though we were on campus, this was back in 1995, so you were not talking fancy internet, it was just text. But we using that online network, we were able to broaden our friendships and meet people we otherwise wouldn't have, because they weren't the people that were necessarily sitting in the same room as us. And even my friend met her now husband through that online network. So one of the very early successes of internet dating, and it's come a long way since then. And it makes the introductions easier, I think, because there is a lot of pressure when you're trying to meet someone face to face, and there is a lot of you have to be pretty brave, because you're putting definitely quite a lot of vulnerability out there. Whereas being able to do that online, it takes a lot of the edge off. And I think it makes it much safer in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And also, like, once you've met a few people, it's much easier to reach out to others, because you've got that sort of strength that you're already not alone, you're already part of a group. But the hardest part, like the worst part, is actually the first move when you know no one. And it's often hard, especially for international students who come here all the way from another part of the world, who know no one, and that actually faces some groups that have already been formed. And sometimes the online world it makes it easier for them to reach out to others without having to face another group.
And not having to worry about accents and things like that, particularly if you're doing like a text chat introduction to start with. It does level the playing fields quite a lot, doesn't it?
It does absolutely.
And so we know in the higher education space, a lot of our students don't read, or at least don't respond to email, and they're often seen as being disconnected, and they lack the proactivity that we expect or that we want. And personally, I think a lot of it is about that overwhelm and excessive complexity that we provide. There is just so much information, and it doesn't mix well with the busy lives of our students. So all our communication efforts do tend to have very mixed results. How could we better manage communication, and in particular our delivery of key messages, so that we do improve the visibility and engagement of our messages? Because that's a key part of that network, is knowing actually what's going on and what they need to know.
Yeah, definitely. It is a hard question, and this is something we've really been working on, as it is a feedback we got from a lot of students and admins as well, saying that students don't have that sort of like they don't read their emails, they are not used to checking their inbox every day. And it's also that they get completely bombarded. I've been a student myself, and my uni inbox was just full of emails. Some were important, others were not, and some some were not at all interesting for me. So I was kind of lost in between those that were important, those that were not. For instance, if someone had lost something on campus, sometimes the entire university would receive an email. So if you've got this sort of email just after another email saying that you need to pay your fees or that you've got a big thing coming up, you just get lost and you can't see the important information. But the issue there is that email is the only way of communication, and that you can't sort of sort things out in an email inbox. So there are two issues. The first one being that no engagement is possible through email. Honestly, it's too formal. I can't like build a friendship with someone through email, or I can't have an honest conversation or ask questions through email. It's just much harder. And the second issue is that information is actually not accessible, because the most important things just get lost in the middle. So it's really about choosing the right channel for the right communication. And I think email is good, but email is good for very academic emails and academic communications. And it is important, but it needs to stay used for those matters, and it needs to get sort of cleaned of all the others. So this is really what we've been working on with Jumbia. It's how do we kind of clear email inboxes so that only very important information get to the students through emails, that they get used to having important information through emails and all the rest somewhere else. So it's about keeping it for those important information. And then on the Jumbia app or web app, we've created channels and different communication methods. So the channels are very similar to Slack, and it's a way to have conversation based on the topic. So for instance, if I'm interested in sports or interested in what's going on with the student associations, I can subscribe to these channels so that I get this type of information. But if I don't want it, if I'm not interested, I don't have it. Then I can also have channels about my class chats. I can have channels about student societies, events, or even general information, like for instance COVID today.
So it's really kind of all in the same place. So you're finding everything, but it's not all overload in exactly the same place. It's kind of pre-categorized almost.
Yep. Exactly. So it's very similar to Slack. It's just like having channels. So for instance, like you can sort of classify things instead of having a list of emails and everything there and just get lost. You've got those classified conversations about those topics. So it really helps trying to find the right information. And it's also about having the sort of more personal conversations there. It's very hard for students to ask questions, but students do have a lot of questions. So our concern was how do we make it easy for them to reach out to others and to ask their questions. And we really found that through instant communication. We've been inspired by the way they would use Facebook or WhatsApp. Yes, and the question was like, how do we use that? Like, how do we get inspired by the way those platforms would really drive engagement, and how do we adapt it to fit the needs of education? I was actually on my master's WhatsApp conversation, and it was kind of a nightmare because it's just the same issue. You do send your questions, you do answer people, so you've got that engagement. But actually there was like one student talking about something and another talking about something else, and you just get lost. So it's kind of the same issue. So the question was, the concern was really how do we make it much easier to sort of keep track on the different topics that you can talk about.
And that sense of privacy as well. I think my biggest bugbear with WhatsApp is that you're giving out your mobile number, so you don't know who is there.
Absolutely. It's really something that with like one of the thing we heard a lot when building the platform the first thing was about privacy and students saying that they don't want to share their private details like phone number, but also Facebook, because you want to keep Facebook for your personal life. You don't want to add like your entire university on Facebook just because you have to talk to them. So the goal of the platform was really to build a sort of student portal and really a university self, and not like to separate it from their personal self. We actually heard that from a student tutor at RMIT, who told us that one of the big issues with Facebook is that students tend to share things that can make them very, very vulnerable. They share those things because they believe they share it with their friends, and actually they don't realize that by being linked with their university groups as well, they actually share it with their entire university, and sometimes it can like be very, very damaging for their university life. And about security as well.
So from your perspective and your experience, what do we need to change to have a much more healthier and inclusive community life, for our students, so that they're able to flourish and to maintain their personal and their academic well-being? Because it is a bit of a, you can't separate one from the other.
Well, this is a very interesting topic, and a very hard one to solve, especially in Australia, where there are a lot of students, which means a lot of differences, and especially with a lot of international students, it really, like, it's much harder to deal with different cultural behaviours, as some, they won't see things as others do, and especially in terms of communication and student life. But I think where it all starts is about like putting efforts in the student experience, and I've seen that this was even more challenging today with COVID-19. We are all aware that universities are going through very, very hard financial struggles. And unfortunately, the student experience is really has been impacted by this. They have sort of stopped all investments as regards the student experience to focus on the academic content, which I definitely understand. But I think today there is even a greater need for efforts to put in this healthy life and supporting students. For me, the beginning of everything is really through a connection. And for me, there is a great need to connect students with others, to connect to like, even just for them to have someone they can talk to is a major thing. So it's not just, it's not only about organising huge events or things like that. It's just about allowing students to have someone to talk to. It can start with mentors. I really believe in peer connections. It's much easier to talk to a peer, to talk to someone that has gone through the same thing or that might be going through the same thing. It's much easier to talk to a peer than to an admin. And it's the beginning of like student groups. It's the beginning of those networks, but it's just making it as easy as possible for the students to be connected with others. It's about, the importance of interaction for both their well-being and their academic success.
And you can't really have one without the other, can you? Like, you can't have academic success without their well-being. So, and I think it makes it hard. And like you say, it's understandable that that's where they're prioritising, because that's where they know and that's their expertise. But for a lot of students, they don't have anywhere else to access that. And that's why it's so important that they're getting it in that sort of combination almost.
Yeah, well, we're talking with a lot of students that have moved away from their from home, whether it is in Australia or abroad, and they come in a completely new city, in a completely new environment. They have to study new things. They have to get used to their new life. If they have no one to talk about it with, they can't succeed in their studies. It happened to me, and I wouldn't have succeeded with my friends around, because like when you're lonely, it's very hard to like see what's good, like to see the beautiful side of things, and to stay focused on your studies. And I really believe that loneliness at uni should not exist. It should be the best years of their life, and it's really the beginning of their entire career, and this is where they need to be in contact with others as much as possible.
And I think we quite often we do focus on the new students, like the high school graduates coming in. It's also the same for many of our mature age students, because they may not have people with that shared experience in their social network. So being able to find people who understand their challenges, and they can form study groups, and they can just talk to someone who gets the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like feel that they are not the only one that are lost. Even if you don't have the answer, just knowing that someone is asking the same question is amazing.
Yes. I'm not the only goose out there. It must be okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. But again, I don't have any sort of answer to these questions. And if I had, I would, like, that'd be great, but I don't. I'm just like trying to put as much effort as I can in this, and trying to do everything in my power to try and find solutions.
And I think it's like, any other complex issue that we have these days. It's applying several different strategies together to actually get the outcome that we need. It's not going to be one size fits all. I know with my work, it's never a one size fits all. It's like, okay, that bit works for those people in this way, and this one works, and it's like a little jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, completely. It's about finding what works for everyone in what kind of universities and or any private colleges or anything.
Yeah, and being prepared to experiment. I think that's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
As you say, with COVID, we don't have a lot of funding that's going around. How do higher education providers actually find the solutions that are going to work for them? They've got to be able to experiment in some ways, and what's their what is the risk that's involved for them, and how do they actually balance that against their potential wins? Because I think it's easy to kind of go back into your shell and go, well, we'll just wait until it's all better. But, we're becoming much more dependent on the income coming from our students. If we're not able to retain them and keep them going and support them, then we're going to lose even that. So
absolutely.
It's almost a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But I definitely believe that. Like, especially if you want to build a sort of confidence with your students, you have to show them that you're putting efforts in all the different sides. And when students are paying that much for their studies, it's a huge commitment at that time. And universities should definitely focus on giving as much as they can.
And just feeling that your university has your back can be a really good thing, that they actually care enough to help support you. It can really be a good motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that sense of belonging will definitely help universities as well in the future. Like, I would recommend my university because I've got that sense of belonging. So it can definitely help.
Yeah, and I guess as an alumni as well, when you and I become multimillionaires, we'll be able to reinvest back into our universities as alums. So we'll be right.
Definitely. Hope so.
Sounds good. Well, that's all the questions that I had. Would you like to share a bit about what you're working on, projects, anything?
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to. Well, at Jumbea, we are kind of at the beginning of our journey. We are launching our first pilot project. It's a pretty exciting period for us, trying to finally see the results of what we've been working on for the last nearly 2 years now. So very exciting. And I'd be happy to be in contact with other people to talk about that sense of belonging and community building in education. We have a project that I believe can fit a lot of universities and can help a lot of students. And this is really what we're working on, is how do we facilitate and how do we help as many students as possible to get the most of their degree. So I know it's a difficult period for everyone, but I do believe that it's also a period that is great for innovation, and that will sort of give birth to many, many great things. We just have to find them and look for them. But yes, if anyone hearing this podcast is interested in hearing more about Jumbea and what we do, I'd be happy to be in contact.
Yep, we'll definitely make sure we put your contact details in the podcast brief. So if anyone would like to get in contact, and I think it's absolutely right. It's like the best of times and the worst of times. You know, we
Exactly.
have the opportunity to really pivot on now and to go somewhere completely different, but we've just got to be brave and look at, well, how do we actually get there?
Absolutely, and I'm kind of excited to see how it will be in the next years, and what will be the consequences of this sort of crisis, if I can say so.
Yeah, like it's going to be a few years before we get out of this, so
yeah, definitely.
Too long to sort of wait and think it's going to be okay. For just another couple of weeks, we'll be back to normal. It's going to be much more different.
Absolutely. Well, but thank you very much, Tanya, for your time, for your question. It's been really interesting, and it's always a pleasure to talk.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It has been a pleasure. And that's it for this episode of the Student Experience podcast. I hope you found it as interesting as I have, and we look forward to having you join us in our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Done!